It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster.
This is crazy, man. This is outrageous, man. This bill isn't fit for purpose.
The ayes to the right, 335. The noes to the left, 260.
The government wins the vote on welfare, but how much authority has the Prime Minister lost?
To be fair, for Keir Starmer, there's been a lot going on. He's been all around the world.
And the concessions come with a £5 billion price tag. Where will the Chancellor find the money? We'll hear from Keir Starmer for the first time since last night's climb down at Prime Minister's Questions. We'll bring you that live at noon. And I'll be asking a government minister how the Prime Minister re-establishes authority over his party. Also today...
You want to go to UK?
Yeah, I
Why?
want to go to UK because they are friendly people, very nice life, and
Nice life.
nice life, nice country, nice people.
20,000 have arrived by small boats since the beginning of the year, a new record. What's happened to smashing the gangs? Joining us today, Labour MP Joe Powell, Conservative MP and Shadow Home Office Minister Matt Vickers, Politics Joe's political correspondent Ava Santina Evans, and Reem Ibrahim from the free market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. This is Politics Live. So let's start by looking at a graph which shows the prediction, the forecast for spending on health and disability benefits over the next few years. You can see here that it shows spending rising to more than £75 billion a year by 2030. So, Joe, do you think it's actually possible to cut this welfare bill or even desirable?
It's absolutely still the objective of the government to reduce the welfare bill in the medium and long term. What was set out now is a sequencing to get there. So starting with the support to get people back to work, so employment support, removing reassessments, increasing universal credit standard allowance, so we reduce that incentive to claim incapacity, and then in parallel, looking at the assessment for personalised independence plans with disabled groups, so we can come to a pragmatic decision about what sustainably we can afford to spend on the personal independence payment, so it's there for people that most need it, and that will come in next year. So we now have a coherent plan going forward.
I mean, it's not a coherent plan, is it, given that the savings you were hoping to make now don't exist? Economists say there will now be no savings.
Well, the economists don't factor in what can happen with people going back to work. So there's a big investment, £3.5 billion, in supporting people to get back to work. The OBR, in their assessments, don't actually assess that. So there will be additional savings from that part of the package. But of course, the decision yesterday will have a fiscal impact. There's no doubt about that. And you can't spend the same money twice. So that will have to be accounted for in the budget later this year.
Matt, does your party want to cut the welfare spending bill?
Well, there's
is it
big
possible?
challenges. I think what we saw yesterday was bigger than that, wasn't it? It was a shambles, the utter mess that you present a bill to Parliament, and while you're at the dispatch box, you unpick it. I think Ian Lavery summed it up. It's outrageous, man. He told us about the fact that there's 16 pages in this bill. Only 2 of it are now taking effect. The reality is 50% more, since the election, 50% more people sign up to incapacity benefits, 3,000 people a day. That is not sustainable. We can't fund that.
But this is your inheritance. You left this mess.
50%. Up 50%. But the other thing to look at is unemployment. Unemployment is increasing. The welfare bill will therefore only get bigger.
But you want to see the welfare bill brought down?
We want to see it reformed. We want to see support for people who rightly need it. But we need to stop this flooding of the welfare system. 3,000 people a day signing up to welfare, incapacity welfare. That's just not a thing. That can't carry on. Someone's got to fund that.
Ava?
But why is it going up? And I think that's the question that government need to be asking themselves. So before you start making cuts, I think you need to ask what is actually going on. And we've seen this huge mental health spike since the pandemic, and that is largely contributing to the rise in PIP payments. So the government needs to ask itself, well, what can we do to counter that? We need to bring in therapists. We need to bring in this talking therapies that we promise people, this community healthcare, none of which has been delivered. But introducing cuts, many economists will tell you, do not work. Let's look back to 2013 when the initial change was made to PIP payments and how, well, PIP was brought in by the Osborne government, Osborne Chancellor, sorry. it was meant to save £2 billion. It actually cost the Exchequer £4 billion because it was so expensive to do this reassessment of claimants, which is pretty much exactly what Labour were again presenting yesterday. So what I would just say is we need to go back to the drawing board. If you are going to make cuts, do them pragmatically.
It's about economic incentives, right? When you have huge amounts of money being spent on those particularly individual people, I think we've got to look at it from that perspective. If you can then be on out-of-work benefits and also be in receipt of PIP, you can earn more than the minimum wage. So what is the incentive for those people to go back into work? And I think, yes, the bill is absolutely important. It's important to talk about the taxpayer money that's being spent on this. But it's also a waste of human potential. There are millions of people across the country being consigned to a lifetime of worklessness. There was an NHS Confederation report that found that between 2021 and 2022, 63,000 people went from being economically inactive because they were students to then immediately being economically inactive because they were on long-term sickness benefits. This is a disgrace. This is outrageous.
It's not a disgrace, but why did that happen? You know, what was the cause and effect of that?
Because of what you said. A lot of it is increases in mental health and mental illnesses. There are people that are claiming out-of-work benefits because they have acne, because they have various different ailments that they believe is the case, and it is ultimately the system. I don't blame those particular people. I blame the system that incentivises them to stay at home.
Let's speak now to Henry Zeffman, our chief political correspondent, who has been assessing the mood. And, well, what is the mood in Number 10 and also amongst Labour MPs, Henry?
Well, let's start with MPs. I've just hot-footed it here from Parliament. I was sitting at a table and someone from the Labour Party sat down next to me and said, "It feels like someone has died." I think that gives you a fair reflection of how bleak the mood is among many, though not all Labour MPs, because, of course, lots of Labour MPs wanted to gut this legislation and successfully made the government do so. In terms of Number 10 more generally, it's also pretty dark, but I think there is also a sort of sense this morning that, OK, that was that. Keir Starmer is coming up to just his first anniversary. The next general election is not going to be for 4 years or so, and so the question now is, what do they do to try to turn things around?
And in terms of his authority, and there's no getting away from the fact that that has been damaged, I mean, what can he do about that? How can he restore that in the near term?
I think he'll struggle to in the near term. I think he's now thinking about the medium term, really. I mean, I think there's a few different things that have become apparent in the last week that actually have been problems, clearly, that have been simmering for the last year. So he is, I'm sure, going to spend more time now in the House of Commons voting, because unlike previous Prime Ministers, he spent almost no time even voting. And voting in the House of Commons is a sociable act because you actually walk through what's called a division lobby, and therefore it's an opportunity for more junior MPs to feel like the Prime Minister knows and cares about them, even if actually, you know, probably they usually don't. So I think that is an important thing that the Prime Minister will try to do more of, try to do more engaging his colleagues, but he'll start doing so with a mood in both directions, by the way, which is completely acrid. I mean, I was speaking to someone in government last night who was talking specifically about members of the 2024 intake, i.e. ones who were elected with Keir Starmer as their leader, who had rebelled or threatened to rebel. And they said this: what did they think the job was? They all think they're JFK because they delivered some leaflets while Morgan McSweeney won them the election. I think clearly the temperature needs to reduce between both sides over the next few days, otherwise the mood's only going to get bleaker.
OK, Henry, thank you very much indeed. We talked about the mood there. Well, the mood in the Commons yesterday at times was actually pretty emotional. Let's take a listen to some of the extracts from the speeches that some MPs made.
These Dickensian cuts belong to a different era and a different party. They are far from what this Labour Party is for, a party to protect the poor, as is my purpose. For I am my brother's keeper. These are my constituents, my neighbours, my community, my responsibility, and I cannot cross by on the other side. For one, let alone for the 150,000 who will be pushed further into poverty.
These benches, both sides of the House, have people who have huge talent and experience. We are not just message replicators. We are not just voting fodder. There is talent, knowledge and expertise in this House which government would do well to harness. It's easy to get into a bunker, and government's hard. I've been a government minister. It's, you get lots to do. You never have a minute to yourself, but listening and engaging is absolutely vital and makes better policy.
I am now one of the only visible, physically disabled members of Parliament. I am proud that our manifesto committed to championing the rights of disabled people and the principle of working with disabled people to ensure our views and voices are at the heart of all we do. My communities nurtured me growing up, and they taught me the values of fairness, equality, community. So it is with a heavy, broken heart that I will be voting against this bill today. As a matter of conscience, I need my constituents to know I cannot support the proposed changes to PIP as currently drafted on the face of the bill before us today.
I can announce that we are going to remove the clause 5 from the bill at committee, that we will move straight to the wider review, sometimes referred to as the Timms review, and only make changes to PIP eligibility activities and descriptors following that review.
This is crazy, man. This is outrageous, man. This bill isn't fit for purpose. If you have a look, it's 16 pages. I can ask you, right honourable gentlemen, to rip the ones out now. That's changed. There would only be 2 pages left. Withdraw the bill.
The confusion which has been expressed in this place is now being felt and expressed in the country at large. I have never seen a bill butchered and filleted by their own sponsoring ministers in such a cack-handed way. Nobody can understand the purpose of this bill now. In the interests of fairness, simplicity and natural justice, is it not best to withdraw it, redraft it and start again?
Joe, the Prime Minister has completely misread this, hasn't he? He's had to, didn't basically. And we're just going to cross over to Keir Starmer, who's leaving number 10 Downing Street for Prime Minister's questions. A little bit of a shout there. I presume that question was probably about welfare. It's the first time he's done Prime Minister's questions for a couple of weeks because he's been on trips abroad to summits and the like, but I'm sure he's delighted to be back in the House of Commons later. We will be bringing you all of that live at midday, of course. Joe, the Prime Minister, let's talk about him and his authority. I mean, he has misread this situation completely. His MPs, they're not up for this. They weren't up for this at all.
Well, in a democracy, people have a voice if they're elected to Parliament, and government should listen and adapt their plans.
He should have listened before he tried to bring this in, surely.
Well, it's a process. And you know, some people will, like I have, had meetings with ministers about this and given their view privately. Other people have signed amendments and spoken very powerfully in the chamber, as you showed yesterday, including my colleague Marie, who's an amazing campaigner on these issues. And that is the process of democracy and listening and adapting. And personally, as somebody that was elected last year, I don't think that is a weakness. I honestly don't. I think it actually should be something we should embrace more of. Exactly as Meg Hillier said, I'm comfortable with if we get to the right outcome.
But it looks chaotic, doesn't it? The fact that this was a centrepiece of the government's reform programme and it's been completely shredded.
Well, the welfare reform programme will continue, as with
will it? I mean, are your colleagues up for this? Are you up for this?
The bill we voted for yesterday is an important piece of legislation. It does increase the standard allowance for universal credit. You know, we have to pass a bill to do that, to spend the money to do that. We have to pass a bill to increase the employment support that will help, as we were discussing earlier, give people the support to get back to work.
Was the high point of the bill to save money? I mean, fundamentally, what has actually ended up passing is going to increase those costs. We don't, as you say, we don't know how much of that is actually going to occur financially, but if the government can't even stick to its guns on literally tinkering around the edges when it comes to welfare reform,
we weren't tinkering around the edges. They were plunging 150,000 people at least into poverty. I wouldn't say that's tinkering around the edges. And if you're actually one of those households, if you are living through those cuts, I don't think you would see it as tinkering. You would see it as devastating.
Ava, I don't think that's true. I don't know where those statistics come from, where people are being plunged into poverty.
The government's own impact assessment.
There are so many people that are in receipt of PIP that absolutely shouldn't be receiving it on a daily basis. Fraser Nelson interviewed somebody that said, I've been trying to tell them I don't need to receive PIP anymore for 3 years, and the Department for Work and Pensions just ignore them. The system as a whole is broken, and this government seems to me that they can't even stick to their guns in very, very small, very minor reforms.
They actually they've gone against their guns, because if you look last year, they were arguing that actually we should keep the £20 uplift of universal credit, which was allotted to universal credit recipients during the pandemic, and they've reneged on that. Actually, what they passed yesterday, the increase, is nowhere near that amount, and actually the health benefit, the health side of universal credit, is decreasing in real terms.
I think part of the problem is that there are so many different benefits that somebody can receive. Actually, so many of these people, especially if you have children, you can be in receipt of up to £40,000 a year of hard-earned taxpayer money.
Let's speak to one of the Labour rebels, one of the 49 who voted against this yesterday, Stella Creasy. Are you worried now about the Prime Minister's authority? You and all those Labour MPs who oppose this, you've destroyed his authority, haven't you?
No, I'm worried about, and I share with Jo that sense that what matters is actually they did listen. They listened to the concerns, those of us who deal with these cases every single day in our constituency, who worried that if actually we were looking for behaviour change, this wasn't the right way to do it. And what I'm worried about now is that we crack on and get it right.
And what does that involve for you?
So I do think this thing about, people talk about co-production, that's a fancy term for working with people who have disabilities to understand the barriers that they face either to getting work or staying in work. One of the reasons many of us are calling for us to learn from the Future Jobs Fund and perhaps reduce NICs on disabled people is that we know that for people with a disability, job hunting and getting a job is 60% harder than it is for those people without a disability. So it's the environment you're asking people to get into. We need a culture change that values and sees the potential that people who have a disability have in order to make it easier for them to get work. I'm also very mindful that PIP is a benefit that people in work have been claiming, and that often it's the carers that it helps support that help people stay in work. So understanding those factors is going to get us much closer to the welfare system that I think we all want to see, and what people from all different sides, there was no right answer last night. There was a frustration, I think it's fair to say, that we'd got into a place where we all wanted to see the system improve, but we weren't convinced that the proposals that were being put forward would get us there. We now have that opportunity to have that conversation and to get there, and I actually think that's a good thing.
But in terms of improving the welfare system, for some people that's about cutting the amount that's being spent. We've looked at a graph earlier showing that it's going to cost £75 billion or more a year by 2030. For you, is any of this about reducing the cost, or is it actually for making it easier to claim benefits for people?
Look, I actually recognise that the welfare system can push people into poverty because of the perverse choices it makes. But I also think we should learn the lesson from the last government. I sat through the bedroom tax. The bedroom tax did not save any money because actually what it did was it displaced the cost to elsewhere in our public sector. So I think we have to look at what the impact of changes are, and actually there's a better way to do this. Absolutely, helping people who want to work get into work, changing that culture where people see people with disabilities as harder to employ is a critical thing that we can do, and that's one of the things that will reduce the welfare costs.
Could you just have a listen to something that was on 5 Live earlier? It was Nicky Campbell's phone-in, and it was a father phoning in about his son.
He was born with a smaller hand, and we only registered him as disabled when he was 18, when he went to university, so he could get extra time on his exams. So he works for one of the big four as an accountant, and basically he gets about £300 a month for his smaller hand, which is like Jeremy Beadle. And because we don't need the money, he doesn't need the money, he uses it to invest in stocks and shares. So we really don't need that money, but because we had to register him as disabled, we had to go down the PIP route. They had to see if he could tie a bow behind his back in some of the medial tasks, and he got PIP.
Now, Stella, that is not the case for lots of people, but similarly on other phone-in programmes that Nicky Campbell's hosted, there have been people calling and saying that there are those claiming, PIP in particular, who don't need it. I mean, that's a system that does need changing, isn't it?
Vicky, are you suggesting that we should use phone-ins as the evidence basis for actually
making welfare? No, but there are people
watching
this who will know people who they say should not be getting PIP.
Look, and social media is a wonderful thing for sharing those things.
No,
What
these are
needs
real
to happen
people
now
who are living
is
through
proper
this.
evidence-based policy making, and that's the opportunity. You need to do that with disability charities. You need to do it with people. I could give you 101 examples from my constituency of people who've been prevented from finding work because we haven't got the support right as well.
But do you think,
this is not
can I
about
just
what
ask
you can
about
trade on Twitter?
reassessments?
This is about serious policy
But about
making.
reassessments, that there have not been very many face-to-face reassessments for a very long time, have they? So are you saying that there isn't anyone who is claiming this who shouldn't be claiming it?
I'm saying that straw men are not the way that you make good policy making. That's why people wanted to bring back having in-person assessments. That's why also working with people who work with people who have disabilities to understand what those challenges are is the right way forward. And I think people watching this will recognise they know everybody who's got a story to tell, but actually what they want is governments working with the people they're trying to get the best out of. That's the opportunity we have now.
The cost of those concessions last night is probably around £4 or £5 billion. How do you think that gap should be plugged, if you like? What should Rachel Reeves do now?
So I absolutely think there are lots of things that we should be looking at. I'll give you one example I was looking at this morning, Vicky. We spend £600 million a year telling people to stay married in the married couples allowance. Now, I don't know anybody who thought, actually, what I'm going to do is ring the taxman and ask them whether I should propose to somebody that I love. That's £600 million that could go into investing into actually supporting families and supporting people in these ways. And I think people in this country would recognise that's probably an anachronism of a tired era. That's what Kenneth Clarke used to argue, for example. I think there are things that we can do around national insurance. As I said, I've talked about actually how do we make it an incentive for employers to take on people who are currently out of work. That's what the Future Jobs Fund did. And the evidence from that scheme is it paid for itself in terms of the long-term employment of people who were harder to employ. So I think there are ways forward. I don't doubt that we're going to have some difficult conversations about taxes in the coming months, but actually that's not to do with welfare, that's to do with the uncertainty of the situation that we're in now. The point, I think, from yesterday, and the point I pay tribute to all my colleagues, because actually people wanted to get this right and they wanted to speak up and say, look, I'm seeing this, I don't think this is going to work, is having those conversations about why we're in government and the choices that we need to make in order to get this country back on its feet.
But will you
really
and those others who did vote against this, will you be selling the message on the doorsteps when taxes, most people think inevitably, will have to go up in the budget?
I'll be selling the message that investing in each other is the best way that A, we get costs down and outputs out, because that's what the last government didn't do, and I saw the consequences of that. And what we are dealing with now is not just fixing the mess that they created, but actually getting ourselves to a point where we have a welfare state that supports people, to get the best out of each other for the benefit of all. That's the mission of a Labour government, and that's what all of us are here to do.
But do you think there will be some in your constituency, working people paying taxes, who might think, I don't want to pay more taxes to pay for this?
I don't think that's the question that you're asking. I think the question you're asking is, will people support the choices made last night? And do people see that things are tough? Of course it's tough. We've got a cost of living crisis. What I'm concerned about is getting costs down for them, because there's too many people who have too much month at the end of their money. But things like the married couples allowance, things like the higher rate allowance, it's not right that people like me got a tax cut under the last government. There are things that actually we could do that will help more people at the front line. And those are the things I think that we should be talking about now.
Do you think Rachel Reeves's rules should be loosened so that she doesn't have to put up taxes?
I think Rachel has an impossible job listening to all of us, but I think actually those are the conversations that we're going to be having now with her, and I think she's very receptive because she wants to get this right too.
Have you spoken to Rachel Reeves about the trouble you might have caused now?
24 hours, no, because the focus in the last 24 hours was about what was being proposed with the welfare reform legislation. And for me, I was concerned to make sure that we have primary legislation, because actually that's how we know the rules are effective.
When it comes to Rachel Reeves, we've talked about the Prime Minister's authority, but this is not the first U-turn that she's been forced into, is it? The winter fuel allowance. Are you frustrated about the approach that's been taken by the Chancellor?
No, and I know it's easy for people to turn everything into a psychodrama.
Well, it's not a psychodrama. I mean, a lot of the decisions she's made have turned out to be rather problematic for the government.
You're asking me to turn this into a personality contest rather than how do we get the policy right. What I'm very focused on is how do we get the policy right. And as a humble backbencher, my job is to feed in what I'm seeing in my local constituency and try and be part of finding those solutions. It's not about appointing blame, it's about what happens next.
So that includes people in Downing Street, people have talked about regime change, about some of the Prime Minister's advisers. You don't think there need to be any changes?
I think what we need to do is learn from this situation that actually having ways to have these conversations earlier in the policy-making process is a more productive thing to do.
OK, thank you very much, Stella, for speaking to us today. Joe, what do you think should happen now in terms of paying for this? It's an awful lot of money that now needs to be found.
Well, the Chancellor will have to do that in the budget. That's where you make decisions on tax and spend, and she'll do that in the autumn. So, obviously, as Pat McFadden was saying this morning, this will have a fiscal impact, and that fiscal impact will have to be accounted for. But, we're talking about, if you look at the totality of what the government spends and what we raise in taxation, we are still talking about a relatively small amount of money in the round, and government have lots of different levers they can pull. The Chancellor was very clear that she will keep the manifesto commitment on taxes that people pay in their pay packet, so income tax, national insurance and VAT.
But employers' national insurance did go up, didn't it? I mean, Stella made this point that actually taxes do matter, and actually part of the reason why we've seen a decline in vacancies, part of the reason why it is so much more expensive to employ somebody is because this government increased employers' national insurance contributions.
Well, the business confidence is at a record high. We heard that from Lloyds yesterday. Real wages are rising faster than inflation for the first time for a long time.
Which would be a good reason then to not freeze income thresholds, right? Because you want people to have a bit more, take-home pay, right? Or is that what the Chancellor's going to do?
If wages are rising by more than inflation, which they're doing now for the first time in over a decade, that means that people have more money in their pocket at the end of the month. And of course, as
the government take it from them in tax.
And as with Stella, if you're focused on poverty, we've also increased the minimum wage. That is a significant increase for people. We've kept the triple lock for pensioners. So people have more money in their pocket at the moment, thanks to the decisions that this government have taken.
That's untrue, because the point is there are less people in work. There are literally millions of people that are consigned to a lifetime of worklessness. It's fantastic that real wages are growing. When we're thinking about this in the wider context of the economy, when there are literally 1/10 of adults on long-term sickness benefits, the labour market is broken. We cannot sit here and say the government increasing employers' national insurance contributions is somehow going to make things any better. It is absolutely a tax on working people, because this is the difference between the impact of tax and the incidence of tax.
I think what you're making
the incidence is on working people.
What you're making the case for is exactly why we need to do welfare reform in terms of what the job centres provide.
Because government haven't been able to do it.
Well, that was in the bill we voted.
You turned on winter fuel payments, you turned on this.
The bill we voted for last night includes a record investment in supporting people into work.
Spending more money.
Let's talk about the wider economy. Helen Miller joins us now from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And Helen, just to lay out for us, will there be any savings now from this government bill?
Well, by the end of this Parliament, basically no. The two bits that are left offset each other, so there's a small giveaway and a small takeaway. But overall, by the end of this Parliament, no, maybe a small saving in the long run, but not the £5 billion certainly that the government was planning to get by the end of this Parliament.
So where does this leave the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves? We talk a lot about how she's going to fill the gap. Just explain why she has to fill the gap. There are some Labour MPs who say she shouldn't have to fill that gap.
Sure. Well, I mean, the context here is that Rachel Reeves gave herself a tiny amount of wiggle room. I mean, really no wiggle room against her fiscal rule that she wants revenues to be matching spending. She only had about, just under 10 billion of room. She's now given away, in effect, 5 billion of that through not doing the welfare reforms. There was money we're now not going to raise through changing winter fuel payments. So basically that wiggle room has gone. Now, she could get lucky. Growth could surprise on the upside. But she could also get unlucky. The OBR could hand her a downgrade in her growth forecast, which means not only does she need to find money to cover the welfare costs, the welfare reform she's now not doing, but also would need to find money to fill the wider hole that will open up if the forecast is worse.
And she has said that she won't raise income tax, she won't raise national insurance or VAT. So if she is going to do something, what options is she left with?
Well, not very many, honestly. I mean, in some sense, there's always tons of ways to raise taxes. But also think about corporation tax. She said she doesn't want to raise the main rate of that. Business rates, the government want to reform but not raise additional revenue from. Once you've taken out the big three taxes, the other bigger taxes, you're actually not left with, you're left with lots of taxes but not very much tax base. So you could change inheritance tax. We saw that was difficult with the farmers. You could change capital gains tax. They already increased it a little bit. There's not very much money there. I mean, you're going to have to do, either you're going to have to break a pledge and increase a big tax, or you're going to have to do lots and lots and lots of little things which you can do but are quite hard.
Quite a lot of those Labour MPs who voted against this yesterday have, sat here in this studio and talked about a wealth tax being the answer. Is that an option?
Well, yes, in the sense that everything's on the table, I guess. I think it depends what you mean by a wealth tax. If you mean an annual tax on the stock of wealth, I don't think that's an economically very good idea. It discourages investment and savings, and I think there are better options out there. I mean, the way we currently tax wealth, through things like capital gains tax, inheritance tax, council tax, are all broken. I would much rather see the government look at the taxes we already have and fix those. I think I'm not feeling particularly optimistic after yesterday because this seems like a government that's struggling to get reforms through.
The fiscal rules is something, isn't it, that we hear a lot about. Can you just explain that to people? Because I think there'll be lots of people thinking, why has she boxed herself in here? Why does she have these fiscal rules?
Sure. So very broadly, the government is trying to ensure that we manage the public finances sustainably, so we don't have debt just ever increasing, for example. And therefore, they put in place rules that are trying to tie their own hands and help them achieve that broader sustainability. Worth remembering that Rachel Reeves already has a set of rules that are very loose. So she's given herself more freedom than other chancellors gave themselves. She already loosened those rules. So could she loosen them further? I mean, yes, I guess in principle, but she's been very, very clear that those rules are ironclad. So I think taking a loose set of fiscal rules and loosening them further, I think would be difficult for her to do. And remember, all she's really saying for her main fiscal rule is that at the end of the Parliament, we want to make sure that revenues are meeting our kind of day-to-day spending. So not investment spending, but day-to-day spending. That's not particularly ambitious in some sense. So yes, she could throw that rule out, and have a different rule. But I think that would make it therefore harder for her to borrow. I think the market would worry if, having been really clear that they were ironclad at the first opportunity, she gives them up.
OK, Helen, thank you very much indeed for that. Joe, are you in favour of a wealth tax?
We already increased taxes at the first budget of this government on capital gains, as Helen said, on the non-dom status, on VAT on private schools. Those are all taxes that disproportionately affect people with more wealth.
People on the state pension taxed for the first time ever at the moment.
People on the state pension are not currently taxed. The personal allowance is currently below the state pension, and I'm sure that the Chancellor will look at keeping that in balance. But the so taxes have gone up on the people with the broadest shoulders already, as Helen set out.
People who create the economic growth and create jobs, they're the people who are being taxed to death. That's why we're seeing unemployment going up. That's why we're not going to see any economic growth to pick this up. And that's why welfare reform is actually probably more important than it's ever been, as more people are thrown on the scrap heap without the opportunity to go to work. The mental health benefits we're talking about, the impact on mental health of not going to work, of not living life to the fullest and enjoying employment and engaging in the workplace, there are real consequences. And every time she takes her axe to businesses across the country, she creates more unemployment, she damages opportunities.
Chicken feed when we're talking about these welfare savings. I mean, yesterday we're talking about £5 billion. I mean, really, in the scheme, the broad scheme of the Exchequer, that is absolute chicken feed. When you look at what is being taken away, we've got a graph in front of us here that I can see, which is the spending on welfare in this country, and I can see it's going up and up and up. What I would like to see is a bar chart of the people who are avoiding corporation tax, the people who are not paying their correct amount into the Exchequer. I mean, we're sitting out here as graduates, OK, and we're paying we're paying about 40% tax, right? And then on top of that, you've also got to pay back your student loan. How on earth do you expect a young person in this economy to buy a house or to live a somewhat decent life under those rules? But instead, you let these quote-unquote wealth creators get away with not paying billions of pounds in corporations.
Let Matt answer that
welfare
question.
Reform is not chicken feed. You know what? Talk to the pensioners
£5
who just
billion
lost their winter fuel payment, and then talk to the chap with the little hand who's getting the same cash to invest in savings. It's wrong. It's meaningful. People who work hard and do the right thing should know that the welfare system is not subsidising other people not to go to work.
To the Exchequer, it's not very much money, but to normal people, it is a significant amount. As I said earlier, it's going to plunge 150,000 people into poverty.
PIP, as a proportion of the entire welfare spend, you're right, is very, very small, and that's why I didn't really understand why the government wanted to go after personal dependence payments first. But the entire welfare bill is enormous, and it's not just about the bill, it's about those people that aren't contributing, that aren't working, that are consigned to this entire life of being told you're not good enough to work, you're not good enough to contribute. And I don't think there is anything compassionate about a system that treats people in this way.
Now, the chamber is filling up in the House of Commons because the Prime Minister, we saw him leaving a little bit earlier, leaving Downing Street. He'll be arriving there in the next 10 minutes or so to face questions from the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, and others. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is just a few metres away from there in the House of Commons. no doubt has been speaking to people this morning. Chris, how on earth does the Prime Minister approach this? This is going to be a very difficult session for him, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. Morning to you, Vicky. Without question, I mean, blimey, the timing immediately after last night, and he finds himself doing Prime Minister's questions, knowing that the headache that he has had inflicted upon him sits behind him, as no doubt Kemi Badenoch will enjoy taunting the Prime Minister about that loss of authority, that loss of grip on the House of Commons, the very thing a massive majority is meant to give you. And I guess he has to hope that welfare reform in particular is perhaps, you know, uniquely awkward thing for Labour backbenchers to wrestle with. And yet, we saw that about turn, didn't we, on the winter fuel payment. I speak to Labour MPs who are jumpy about the increased inheritance tax on farmers. That's coming the way of Parliament in the autumn. You know, can the Prime Minister somehow get a grip, project a sense of authority? How does he kind of reset things and try and show that he's in charge? Because frankly, last night, self-evidently, he wasn't.
I mean, at this kind of time, we often hear the thought of a reshuffle, the thought of changes in staff in number 10 or something similar. Do you think there's any sense of that happening soon?
I think that's in the mix and being talked about. It's definitely being talked about. The time frame upon which they look at these kind of things, whether it's personnel, whether it's a reshuffle, some sort of sense of a reset. Prime Minister's well aware this week with the 10-year strategy for the NHS coming that there's a chance in that sense to lean into something where they feel that they are making some progress. Equally, they won't want to necessarily be seen to panic and to rush, and certainly when you get to the question of reshuffles, they are perilous for a Prime Minister because you annoy as many people as you promote, and they can, as evidence, as history points to, very often go, from Downing Street's perspective, wrong. So they are not without jeopardy themselves. I think that'll be in the mix over the coming months. How soon, I guess, depends on, I don't know, how the next couple of weeks pan out. Can there be a sense of steadying the ship, or is there a sense that they need to move more quickly? I don't hear any whispers of, you know, whiteboards being wheeled around with names upon them just yet, but, you know, that'll no doubt come in time.
And just a word on the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, because I'm sure there is a blame game going on in all of this. But, you know, there's been a few things now, haven't there, where Rachel Reeves and her plans, she's had to go back on them. Is she being blamed in some quarters for all of this, or is the Prime Minister thinking, well, I can't get rid of my Chancellor because then I'm the next one in the firing line?
That's the logic, I think, isn't it, from number 10's perspective so often in this kind of situation. And the Prime Minister and the Chancellor were the kind of core team, the duopoly, if you like, at the top of the Labour Party in opposition in trying to make an argument about being seen to be economically credible. So often Labour's Achilles heel in opposition. I mean, who would be Chancellor right now? The dilemmas, the trade-offs, huge already. And then for Rachel Reeves now confronting, you know, billions of pounds worth of holes in her plans, trying to patch them up between now and the autumn. Now, there are Labour MPs who really don't like those self-imposed fiscal rules that she's got, the whole approach to the management of the economy. You speak to people in the Treasury and they say, look, we have got to be credible, we have got to be realistic, and that involves really difficult trade-offs, and some Labour MPs, frankly, need a lesson in those trade-offs, is the view I hear coming out of government. It's all very well, people say privately, you know, opposing stuff as they might see it rather willy-nilly, because that's an easy thing for a backbencher to do. So goes the argument. It's not actually that easy to oppose the whip and be willing to stand up in public and say so. But what about the trade-offs those in government have to face? That's the argument you hear coming out from those in government, which again gets you back to the fact that the Prime Minister somehow has to bind his party back together again after this sort of spectacular and very public falling out.
Thank you very much, Chris. We will be bringing all the action from the House of Commons live at around noon today. Just to go back to something we touched on earlier, Matt, talking about the number of people with mental health issues who are claiming PIP. I mean, your party talks about making huge savings in the welfare bill. Do you think there are people who are claiming these benefits who shouldn't be?
There are people in the who benefit, well, who need the welfare system. It's there as a safety net. That's what it's there for. That's what it should be about. We'd be better able to help those people if we went through a more meaningful reform to welfare, toughening...
That inevitably means taking it away from some people, though, doesn't it? And people are very reluctant to talk about the details.
Acne, people with obesity, getting sort of 3,000 people a day sign up to incapacity
but how
benefits.
Do you find
that
them?
can't
it's all
happen.
very well and good, isn't it, to say we've got to cut the welfare bill, but how do you do it? Do you know how expensive that is?
I would significantly...
Do you know how expensive that is? They spent £4 billion, I told you, £4 billion doing reassessments to get people onto PIP payments in 2013. That is the entire saving that had been made up if yesterday's bill had gone
in the short term, but then how much are we then spending on those people in the long term when they're actually
There are always going to be people who need to be reassessed. There are always going to be new assessments, new people who want to qualify for it. The cost doesn't end there.
I don't think somebody saying over the phone, I have depression, I don't want to work, should be allowed to take hard-earned taxpayer money and sit at home. Not just because it's unfair for taxpayers, but also because it's not good for them.
Are we oversimplifying the process? Because the way that it's reported to me when I interview people who are eligible for these PIP payments is that it's a very gruelling process and actually it's very undignified. I don't think it is as easy as just ringing up and saying, can I have a bit of cash?
I think what we have seen is that there are definitely people that do need these payments and do need the support, and there are absolutely people that don't. I mean, we heard on Nikki Campbell's show somebody saying they use their PIP payments for spending it on stocks, investing it in stocks and shares. That happens.
Is that an anomaly or what is that?
Well, this is the point. We don't know. That's why they need to be assessed in person. That's the point. We need to know who these people are, what they actually need. And I'm sorry, but any measure that says a quarter of the population is disabled is not a measure worth listening to.
Joe, do you think that people need to be now reassessed in person? Because it has pretty much come to a halt since COVID.
I think that is part of the answer, but also to stop reassessing people that don't need to be reassessed because they will always need that support, which is also a huge waste of time and mental effort and all the rest for the people that go under those reassessments. But going back to what we were talking about, tomorrow we'll lay out the 10-year plan for the NHS. We inherited over 7.5 million backlog on the waiting list. We've never had it that high. Massive waiting lists in mental health support, as others have said. And absolutely part of the answer is to get those waiting lists down, get more community prevention services for people suffering from mental health issues. That is exactly what the plan tomorrow is going to lay out. And I have constituents who cannot get a talking therapist or mental health support.
I mean, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has talked about this in terms of people claiming benefits, and he said that in some cases people are being overdiagnosed, that there is an overdiagnosis of people with mental health issues, which is then leading to them, in some cases, claiming benefits.
Incentivised by a welfare system.
I don't think any of us should be second-guessing what doctors assess.
Well, Wes Streeting has.
We absolutely should.
What we should be doing is investing in proper mental health support so that people don't get to that position.
So he's wrong to say that, then, Wes Streeting?
Well, he's right to be investing in mental health services.
But wrong to say that there's an overdiagnosis.
We're talking about trying to solve the problem by investing in mental health support. I have a mental health A&E in my constituency. This is a new thing the government is piloting. I think there's 8 around the country. And it is showing really good results from people who can go and get a quick prescription, they can go and get some advice and support that otherwise they might have waited months and months to get. Those are the sorts of ideas that will actually tackle the root of this problem rather than trying to deal with the symptoms.
Then why not do that first? Why not do that before you then start proposing welfare cuts to these people? Because, you know, if God forbid, if someone is extraordinarily ill, if they have extreme depression and they've got nowhere that they can turn to, the only thing that they've got is a little stipend from the government, what are they meant to do in the interim while you're working all of these problems out?
Well, as the government have said, anyone that is currently claiming those benefits is not going to be affected by these changes. So that buys time to do the investment in the sorts of things I'm talking about.
But you see how they got it backwards, right? You see how you can see that the bill yesterday was presented too early, because if you haven't got all of those checks and balances in place that you're talking about, it seems ridiculous to make the cuts.
But part of it is also the economic incentive, right? The fact that when you are in out-of-work benefits and you're receiving PIP, you can earn more than the minimum wage. That in itself is proof that actually, if you are an individual, it makes sense, right? It's an economic incentive.
But what if
you've got children?
What if you need
But what if you don't need them and you've got children? You don't need to. You're receiving £40,000 a year. of taxpayer money, why would you go to the job centre and give that up? Why would you say, I no longer need this money?
But
there are people out there in this country, that don't need it, but they say, you know what, I would like to retrain, I would like to get back into work, but they are so afraid of losing that money that they don't.
But they've guaranteed that now. They guaranteed that yesterday.
Well, not just with
oh, actually, did that go out of the paper as well?
I think
that's still in.
Well, we're in a situation where 1/5 of Manchester are on benefits. 1/5. 1/5 of Manchester, one of the most successful cities in the UK. I think one of the futures, absolutely. And 1/5 of the population, the adult population, not including children or pensioners, 1/5 are on out-of-work benefits. That is a disgrace.
Can you just come back on that?
Well, we inherited a system with loads of people who want to work not having the support they need to work. And one of the things we haven't talked about, which is also in the welfare reform package, is working with employers to provide those adaptations. I've got lots of people who say to me,
they would jobs tax.
Well, they say to me, I would
point.
like to work if the employer could account for my fluctuating conditions, for example, which lots of people have, and that's a very serious issue if you want to go to work. You also have the disincentive, where under the previous system we inherited from the Conservatives, you could lose your benefits immediately if you tried to work. And that's right to try. So now you have a system where you say you can try and do a job.
Joe,
and
when you talk about
you're not going to have that
right
risk.
to try is a good idea.
Joe, when you talk about the fluctuating illness, and that is a real issue, isn't it? And with the best will in the world, an employer could find that quite difficult to deal with, especially a small employer.
Yeah, but I think good employers absolutely will make those adaptations if they have the right support from government to do it. And I think we heard from Stella Creasy the previous examples of how that's worked, and also that individual is supported. I mean, that is why the personalised independence payment, sometimes people confuse this. It's actually supporting some people to work if they need that support.
80% don't work.
But that is an important group of people who that is actually playing an important part in them playing a
There's also the regulations. I mean, the Employment Rights Bill are going to make it so much more difficult for employees to take on those people. So that the Employment Rights Bill will hurt those vulnerable people.
Sometimes I think you won't be happy until we've got absolutely zero rights at work and no one's allowed to claim any welfare at all.
It's a negotiation between employees and employees. The Employment Rights Bill, the jobs tax, the increase in national insurance contributions, all of these things make it more difficult for employees to take on any of these vulnerable people.
Most businesses businesses do. The people who run these businesses want to be responsible employees. They want employees who enjoy their work. Actually, all of these things that are being dumped on them, whether it be the changes to small business rates that are battering small businesses in leisure, hospitality and retail, whether it be the jobs tax that means young people aren't getting those opportunities, the guy who you're going to employ, we can't do that because it costs significantly more. Those pressures are closing opportunities to young people. They're dampening down anybody who might want to create great jobs for people.
Do you know what did put pressure on young people?
And then the Employment Rights Bill is absolutely battering them as well.
OK, it's time for Prime Minister's questions. Let's hear what the Prime Minister has to say about all of this.
Delegation. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Paul Ward.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Saturday...
OK, there seems to be a bit of a challenge on who can cheer the most. I've never known one Prime Minister get as much cheering. Come on, Prime Minister.
I think they were cheering more, Mr. Speaker. Quite right, too. This Saturday marks the 77th birthday of our National Health Service. And I want to begin by thanking our dedicated NHS staff for their service. And in that 77th year, I'm proud that this Labour government has delivered 4 million extra appointments, 1,700 more GPs, and the lowest waiting list for 2 years. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party is proud to have been the party that created the NHS, and tomorrow we're announcing our 10-year health plan to build an NHS fit for the future so that in many years and decades to come, we can still proudly celebrate the anniversary of the NHS. Mr. Speaker, may I also wish England and Wales the best of luck in the Women's Euros. And, of course, congratulate England's under-21s on retaining the Euros. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
When this Labour government extended free school meals to 500,000 more children last month, Laura, a working mum in Rochdale, told me it would save her £500 a year. She said, "I'm over the moon, only Labour would have done this." Does the Prime Minister agree with me that people voted Labour a year ago not just for change but for hope, and that cutting child poverty is the moral mission of this government to help every child in this country?
Mr. Speaker, I'm really proud that we extended free school meals for another 500,000 children, including Laura's. And it's people like Laura that we have in our mind's eye and giving children the best start in life. And I think the Child Poverty Task Force visited Rochdale recently and will continue to back parents like Laura. But, Mr. Speaker, we've already started not just free school meals being rolled out, free breakfast clubs, extending childcare. That's real change under this Labour government.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all take this opportunity to congratulate the member for Rochdale for being the toady of the week, helping the Prime Minister. We all know it's
There's a lot of people wanting to catch my eye today. There is some free hits on this side. I won't waste your opportunity.
It's been a difficult week for the Prime Minister. So let's start with something simple. Can the Prime Minister tell the House how much his welfare bill is going to save?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying free school matters on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, in relation to welfare, what we delivered last night was a bill which ends mandatory reassessment of those with severe disabilities. That is the right thing to do. It rebalances universal credit. That is long overdue, and it sets out a pathway to reform of PIP. Mr. Speaker, it's consistent with the principles I set out throughout. If you can work, you should work. If you need help into work, the state should provide the help. The system that they broke doesn't do so. And if you can't work...
I think there's one or two I can spot immediately. Usual voices, same names, please. It's too early to leave the chamber. Prime Minister.
And, Mr. Speaker, if you can't work, you must be supported and protected. The reformed welfare system that we're putting in place will be better for individuals, better for the taxpayer, and better for the economy.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think the Prime Minister actually watched what happened in the House yesterday. His bill was completely gutted. A U-turn in the middle of the debate, removing Clause 5. Where on earth was he? The reason why he can't answer the question is because he knows it doesn't save any money. It's going to cost millions. This is the first Prime Minister in history to propose a bill to save money who ended up with a bill which costs money. So if the bill doesn't cut welfare spending, can the Prime Minister tell the House how many people it will get into work?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad she asked that because it gives me the opportunity to say we've already started changing the job centres and investing in support back into work. The Trailblazer scheme, which is doing exactly what she asked me, which is getting people back into work. The bill last night will help people back into work, and of course the Timms review is ongoing. But I tell you what won't help people back into work, what won't help control the costs, and that is voting to keep the broken system. And that is what they did last night. Everybody in this House accepts that the current system is broken. It invites the question, who broke it? They broke it. And last night, they voted for the status quo. The broken system is their policy. That won't help individuals, taxpayer, and it certainly won't help the economy.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell him what we did on welfare. Yes, they can laugh. While they're laughing, they don't know my party delivered the biggest reform of welfare in government. We got record numbers of people into work, including millions of disabled people, and we cut the deficit every year until COVID. The fact is, we're not scared of doing difficult things on this side of the House. We got people back into work. What he forgets is that since the election, since he became Prime Minister, an additional 1,000 people a day are signing on to incapacity benefits. That is 50% more than under us. 50% more than under us. And, Mr. Speaker, astonishingly, because of the mess they made yesterday, because there are no more savings, sickness benefits alone are set to rise to £100 billion on his watch. He cannot reduce that now. He cannot reduce that now.
Mr McKee, I think we've had a run-in before. I certainly don't want any more, seriously. You're obviously not getting your timing right because I can hear your voice every time.
I'll start again, Mr. Speaker. Yes. Sickness benefits, louder for those at the back, sickness benefits are set to rise to £100 billion because of their mess. They cannot now reduce it. They can't reduce it because after last night's humiliating U-turn, we know he cannot control his MPs. They're cheering now, but you signed the amendment. You signed the amendment. Over 100 people signed that reasoned amendment until the bill was completely gutted. He said that he would take the difficult decisions, but isn't the reality that he is too weak to get anything done?
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell them what they did to the welfare system. They broke it. They broke it. And it's the same as the NHS. What did they do? They broke it. Same as the economy. What did they do? They broke it. They broke everything that they touched. And now she describes the broken system that we are trying to fix. What did she do? She voted against fixing the system that they broke. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, and spell that out, they voted last night for the system that is keeping 1 million young people not learning or earning. That is a disgrace of their system. They voted for a system where we have 3 million people out of work on ill health, and they voted for that system. We're fixing it. We're clearing up the mess that they left, just like we're clearing up the NHS and the economy.
He's got some brass neck. Has he read the papers this morning? Has he read the papers this morning? That bill will achieve nothing. It is a pointless waste of time and is absolute proof that he doesn't have a plan. Let me tell the House what's going to happen. In November, the Chancellor is going to put up our taxes to pay for his incompetence. We on this side of the House know that you can't tax your way to growth. But people out there are frightened. People out there... Yes. These are the same people who cheered when they talked about the NI rise and the jobs tax. Why are they complaining now? People out there are frightened. Can he, Mr. Speaker, can he reassure them by ruling out tax rises in the autumn budget?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, she knows that no Prime Minister or Chancellor ever stands at the dispatch box and writes budgets in the future. That isn't what they did, it isn't what we did, and she knows it. But she talks about growth. For 14 years, we had stagnation, and that is what caused the problems. And I'm really pleased, Mr. Speaker, to show the progress that we're making. I can update the House. Last week, Amazon put in £40 billion of investment into this country, one of the biggest investments of its time. That brought the inward investment to £120 billion in the first year of this Labour government. Mr. Speaker, I can also tell the House that business confidence is the highest for 9 years. That's longer than the whole time that the leading opposition's been in Parliament. And the figures this week demonstrated and showed we had the fastest growth in the G7 in the first quarter of this year. What a difference to the mess they left. That's the difference a Labour government made.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about jobs. Unemployment has risen every month since Labour took office. Has he spoken to Nissan, by the way, and looked at what's happening there? This man has forgotten that his welfare bill was there to plug a black hole created by the Chancellor. Instead, they're creating new ones. They're creating new ones. She looks... Mr. Speaker, she's pointing at me. She looks absolutely miserable. Labour MPs, yeah, she looks absolutely miserable. Labour MPs, they can point as much as they like. The fact is, Labour MPs are going on the record saying that the Chancellor is toast, and the reality is that she is a human shield for his incompetence. In January, he said that she would be in post till the next election. Will she really?
Prime Minister. She certainly won't. Mr. Speaker, I have to say I'm always cheered up when she asks me questions or responds to a statement, because she always makes a complete mess of it and shows just how unserious and irrelevant they are. But she talks about the black hole. They left a £22 billion black hole in our economy, and we're clearing it up. And I'm really proud, Mr. Speaker, that in the first year of a Labour government we got free school meals, breakfast clubs, childcare, got £15 billion invested in transport in the North and the Midlands. We're cutting regulation, planning and infrastructure is pounding forward, building 1.5 million homes, the biggest investment in social and affordable housing, and of course, Mr. Speaker, the 3 trade deals. Remember the ones that they couldn't get, including the US trade deal. On Monday, those tariffs came down. That secured the jobs at JLR. That's who we care about on this side of the House.
How awful for the Chancellor that he couldn't confirm that she would stay in place. Yeah. He talks about this year in office. This week marks the first anniversary of Labour coming into office. And let's have it. Yes. The whips can't get them in the lobbies, but they can get them to cheer at the right time. Yeah. The fact is, his own MPs are saying this government is, and I quote, incoherent and shambolic. That's Liverpool Wavertree that said that. I could go on and on. But the fact is, it's been mistake after mistake after mistake. There is no plan to get people into work. There is no plan to cut the welfare budget. There is no strategy. There is just a series of humiliating U-turns like winter fuel, like grooming gangs. Mr. Speaker, what's really shocking is that every other party in this House voted for even more welfare spending yesterday. Yes, those MPs behind him and the Lib Dems and Reform. The Conservative Party believes that this country needs to live within its means. We know what we believe, Mr. Speaker, but this is a Prime Minister who has U-turned on everything he's done in office, including his own speeches, because he doesn't know what he believes. With left-wing Labour MPs now running the government, isn't it working people who will now pay the price?
Mr. Speaker, this is why she always cheers me up. She talks about living within their means, having left a £22 billion black hole. Mr. Speaker, she talks about the first year. I'm really proud of our first year in government. We promised, Mr. Speaker, 2 million extra NHS appointments. We've delivered 4 million. A promise made and a promise delivered. We promised the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation within the first 100 days. Promise made, promise delivered. We promised free breakfast clubs. That's a promise made and a promise delivered. Banning bonuses for water bosses who pollute our rivers. That's the mess they left. A promise made and a promise delivered. Creating GB Energy. A promise made and a promise delivered. The largest increase in defence spending since the last Labour government. A promise made and a promise delivered. And putting more money in the pockets of working people, particularly the 3 million who are the lowest paid through the national minimum wage. A promise made and a promise delivered. We're only getting started, and the Chancellor has led on all these issues, and we're grateful to her for it.
Natasha Iron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unlike the members opposite, this government has not dragged its feet in banning zombie knives, ninja-style swords, and its effort to tackle knife crime. And in Croydon, where youth violence has cast a devastating shadow across our communities, our local police is running a surrender scheme this month to get these dangerous weapons off our streets. So will the Prime Minister join me in commending the tireless work of Croydon's police officers? And will he outline what his government is doing to ensure the Met Police has the resource it needs both to protect neighbourhood policing and to face the unique challenges that they face?
Prime Minister. Well, she's right to raise the importance of banning these despicable weapons, and I know how much she cares about this issue. The ban on zombie knives and machetes came into effect last year, and the ban on ninja swords will come into effect this August. The Crime and Policing Bill will increase penalties for illegal sales and give the police new powers to seize knives. Mr. Speaker, I have to say this. What did the party opposite do when we put that bill before the House to take these measures? They voted against it. And knife crime went up, soared on their watch, and they've clearly learned absolutely nothing.
Sir Ed Davey, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the government was asking this House to vote for a law that would mean someone with a condition like Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis would qualify for a personal independence payment today, but someone diagnosed with the same condition, with the very same symptoms, in a few months' time would not. We all know that the cost of welfare needs to come down, but that was not a fair way to do it. Until he lost control yesterday, the Prime Minister was arguing for that approach. Has he changed his mind on this or not?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Stephen Timms review will take place. It's a very important review to look into this issue. But what we did do last night was end mandatory reassessments for those with severe disabilities. I thought that he and his party cared about things like that. It's the right thing to do, and they voted, Mr. Speaker, against it. We rebalanced universal credit, long overdue. I think he believes that. But what did he do last night? He voted against it. We set out a pathway to reform PIP, something he argues for every week. And what did he do when he had the chance? He voted against it.
Sir Ed Davey. Mr. Speaker, the House and his backbenchers will note that he didn't answer my question. Moreover, if he looked at our proposals for welfare reform, for cutting down the bill, he wouldn't be in the mess that he's in. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, from Hillsborough to Grenfell, Primados to Horizon, the contaminated blood scandal to nuclear test veterans, the bereaved and survivors of some of our country's most appalling scandals have come together to call for a legal duty of candour and the secondary duty needed to make it practical and effective for investigations and inquiries. Now they're frightened that the government is watering down these proposals to such an extent that they would be toothless. So after months of delay, can the Prime Minister reassure campaigners that his Hillsborough law will include a real legal duty of candour as he promised?
Prime Minister. Yes, it will. And as he may know, I've known some of the families from Hillsborough for many years now. I met them over a decade ago and know exactly what they have been through, and the various other groups that have suffered similar injustices with similar follow-up, which is an additional injustice on top of the original injustice. And that's why we will bring forward a Hillsborough law. It's a commitment I've made. I have been talking to the families in recent weeks, personally myself, to make sure that we get this right, and it is important we get it right, but it will have a legal duty of candour.
Kim Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Follow-on question. The Prime Minister visited my constituency in 2022 and told families, and I quote, "One of my first acts will be to put the Hillsborough law on the statute book." Repeated the same promise at conference last year that the bill would be published at the anniversary in April. That didn't happen. However, the government are now planning to table a watered-down version that doesn't deserve to be named Hillsborough law. After PMQs, my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool West Derby, will introduce the real Hillsborough law. So can the Prime Minister finally honour his promise and back the law in full? If not, why not?
Prime Minister. I'm grateful to her for raising this and remember well the visit that we had. This is a really serious issue, Mr. Speaker. It is important that we get it right. I am fully committed to introducing a Hillsborough law, including a legal duty of candour for public servants and criminal sanctions for those that refuse to comply. It is important we get it right. I have been personally engaging with some of the families on this because, as I say, I've been involved and seen firsthand what they've been through for over 10 years. I first met them when I was a Director of Public Prosecutions and there was a consideration of what order certain things would happen. That was about a different issue, actually. It was about an issue of great concern to them. But she's right to raise this. We will bring this forward. I just want to take the time to get it right and then put it before the House.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his victory speech last year, the Prime Minister promised to end the chaos. Does he think that the public still believe him?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, we've delivered more in the first year of a Labour government than they've delivered in 20 years. Let me give him one example. We had waiting lists. We said we'd do 2 million extra appointments. We've done 4 million for the NHS in England. What a contrast, Mr. Speaker, where they've been in charge for that 20 years. Scotland's doctors now saying, in the past week, I think, and this is their quote, that the Scottish NHS is, their quote, dying before our very eyes. They should be ashamed. Their own public health minister is admitting that the SNP failure is costing lives. Scotland need new direction so it can bring waiting lists down in Scotland, just like we've done in England.
David Taylor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hemel Hempstead is a new town that was built by a Labour government after the Second World War and provided decent housing to families like mine. Yet, 80 years on, the #1 issue in my casework is a shortage of housing. I therefore welcome this government's commitment to build thousands of new homes. In my constituency, we're looking at a Hemel Gardens community scheme that could provide 11,000 of them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this development needs to be a mix of genuinely affordable houses to buy, council houses to rent, and be accompanied by the right health, education and road infrastructure?
Minister.
Well, I totally agree with him, and it's projects like this that are essential to building the 1.5 million homes that we need, whilst at the same time creating vibrant and strong communities. Mr. Speaker, in keeping with the Attlee legacy, we're supporting 47 locally led garden communities to deliver tens of thousands more homes, and of course delivering the biggest boost to social and affordable houses in a generation.
Mr. McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday afternoon this week, a 4-year-old girl was seriously injured after being hit by a car on Lewis Road, just off the A259 in Newhaven, in my constituency. I can report to the House that she's recovering well in hospital. Residents in Newhaven, Seaford and nearby Sussex coastal towns have been warning about how unsafe these roads are. Indeed, the County Council submitted a fully costed plan for safety improvements on the A259 to government, but funding remains blocked. So I'm asking, or appealing to the Prime Minister directly, will he personally intervene to unblock the funding needed to make the A259 and surrounding roads safer to ensure there is never a repeat of an incident like this?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear of the incident that he quotes, and my sympathies with the family, and I think I would send the best wishes of the whole House to the family and to the little girl. He speaks about this A259. I do hear a lot about this road because it runs through the constituency of my honourable friend for Brighton, Kemp Down and Peacehaven. And I know it needs addressing, and I know how strongly they've both been raising this and campaigning on it. A decision is going to be set out shortly. I think he has met the Roads Minister, but I'll make sure that he's kept fully updated of developments.
Olivia Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud to represent thousands of people working in the defence sector. Ordinary people doing extraordinary jobs to keep our country safe. And I was delighted that the Defence Secretary recently joined me in my constituency to mark this government's £15 billion investment in the atomic weapons establishment. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that our commitment to defence sector investment is vital not just for our national security, but for jobs, opportunity and growth in constituencies like Reading West and Mid-Berkshire?
Prime Minister. Well, I pay tribute to her, and she's a fantastic advocate for her constituents. She's right to highlight the important work by the defence sector in her constituency and, of course, right across the United Kingdom. We are investing £15 billion in our sovereign nuclear warhead programme. That will support, Mr. Speaker, nearly 10,000 jobs, including many in her constituency. And that's the defence dividend in action, a historic boost to defence spending, represented and reflected in good, well-paid jobs across the United Kingdom.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the government appears to be in listening mode, will the Prime Minister agree to scrap other measures that are pushing more people into poverty, such as the cruel two-child benefit cap and the harsh and totally unacceptable cuts to universal credit for ill and disabled people, which remain in yesterday's dog's breakfast of a bill?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be ungenerous, but I don't think I'm going to be listening to him or his party. They were the ones that put an £80 billion unfunded tax commitment before the electorate of the last election. And they're the ones that talk about change and clean power, but every single time there's an infrastructure project or there's any change that's needed, they block it, including in their own constituencies.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst we all revere the football stars of the past, many are struggling with welfare issues, including organised financial fraud and head injuries linked to the onset of dementia. May I give the Prime Minister this letter on player welfare from 303 former players? Local champions like John Stiles and international superstars including Kevin Keegan and Graham Souness have signed it. Would he agree to request to meet a group of ex-players as cited in the recent letter to the Prime Minister from one of his heroes, Michael Thomas, who of course shone when he played for Arsenal and Liverpool?
Prime Minister.
Can I just start by congratulating Dawn Assel on her recent and richly deserved MBE for her work on behalf of former players. I do remember Michael Thomas very well, putting that goal in injury time, Mr. Speaker, in 1989 to take the lead. It was a fantastic victory. I have had the pleasure of meeting him and actually discussing with him the very campaign that she raises. I'll certainly meet him again, because athletes have brought us so much joy. We should have proper support from their sporting bodies on health and welfare, and we will ensure that they do.
Steph Aquarell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer members to my role as a serving county councillor. Mr. Speaker, July is Good Care Month, and Jane Austen told us the best place for convalescence by the sea is Cromer in my constituency. However, thanks to Norfolk's Conservative County Council, Cromer risks losing its convalescence facility forever. Reablement centres like Benjamin Court are exactly what the NHS needs, and yet the Tories are shutting it down. Will the Prime Minister ensure that the relevant Health Minister meets with me and concerned local campaigners to discuss what could be done to save Benjamin Court?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this important issue, and decisions around services are matters for the Integrated Care Board, and that means they're taken locally, obviously. But I'm glad that he's raised this, because we agree that the sector does need reform, and unlike the party opposite, we're investing in the sector £4 billion of additional funding alongside an independent commission into adult social care to improve the quality of care across the United Kingdom, including for his constituents.
Martin Rhodes.
Mr. Speaker, figures from the British Transport Police show a staggering 47% rise in violence and serious public order offences against rail staff between 2021 and 2024. This epidemic of violence was allowed to escalate under the previous Conservative government, which failed to act while frontline workers were increasingly put at risk. Does the Prime Minister agree that our transport workers deserve to do their jobs without fear, and will he reaffirm this Labour government's commitment to ensuring that train operating companies are held fully accountable for protecting those who keep our railways safe and moving?
Prime Minister.
There are shocking statistics, and rail staff work incredibly hard to keep our country running and keep people safe, and the abuse and assault on staff is utterly unacceptable. And we're taking measures to make sure they are safer. We want to encourage, Mr. Speaker, the use of body-worn cameras, which have been proven to reduce violence against staff by up to 47%. And may I take this opportunity to thank our outstanding British Transport Police for everything that they do to support staff and passengers.
Bernadette Ross.
This time a year ago, farmers and many others across the country were about to go to the polls, perhaps about to vote Labour for the first time, because they took at the Prime Minister's own word that he and his party would never leave farmers in the background again. Within weeks, however, that trust had been completely shattered by the family farm tax. Farmers know how devastating that tax will be. The industry know how devastating it will be. We on these benches know how devastating it will be, and more of his own backbenchers do too. So following the U-turn on the winter fuel payments, and following the U-turn on grooming gangs, and following the many U-turns on welfare payments yesterday, will the Prime Minister now tell farmers up and down the country when it will be their turn for a U-turn, and that he will scrap the family farm tax?
This time a year ago, the country was lining up to boot their man of office. And long may they remain there. Mr. Speaker, we put in place the most significant funding for farmers in the budget. We've got a roadmap for work for farmers that we're working on. And, of course, where they fail to actually spend the money, we're spending it with farmers.
Charlotte Littles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The nuclear industry provides over 29,000 jobs across the North West, including thousands in Birchwood Park in my constituency, which is a globally leading centre of nuclear innovation. I welcome the government's new modern industrial strategy, which will give businesses the confidence to invest after years of economic chaos under the last government. Can the PM outline how the industrial strategy will support the growth of the nuclear sector, which is vital for our energy security and creating thousands more high-paid, high-skilled and unionised jobs?
Prime Minister.
She's a champion of nuclear, and I know how important it is to thousands of her constituents. Mr. Speaker, we are securing homegrown energy and driving bills down by unleashing a golden age of nuclear. And that includes Sizewell C, which we announced just 2 or 3 weeks ago, small modular reactors, and that means jobs, investment and opportunities across the country, including in her constituency.
Julia Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rush changes to the welfare bill not only left Parliament with whiplash, but more importantly, have left many vulnerable people living in limbo, like Chris or Emma in my constituency, who were set to lose PIP that they rely on for work. And Chris has already lost a vital carer through all of this uncertainty. It is not right that in a society, vulnerable people have to be worried about what the government will do next. Does the Prime Minister understand that this has eroded trust at a time when we need it most?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think what would be better for building trust is an accurate description of what we're doing. The Stephen Timms inquiry review is really important to look at this really important issue, but we have to get on and reform. We have a broken system that is not working for those that are using the system. It's not working for the taxpayer. It's not working for the economy. We have to get on and reform it, and we'll do it in the way we set out yesterday.
Peter Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I pay tribute to veterans of the Royal Naval Association Crosby branch who are in the gallery today. Mr. Speaker, Gabe Santa, a 15-year-old, fell to his death from a multi-storey car park in Liverpool in 2020. He is one of the many dying in such tragic circumstances, including in my constituency. My multi-storey car park safety bill seeks to prevent such deaths. Will the government look carefully at its contents as part of a national suicide prevention strategy?
Minister.
The answer is yes, we will look at the content of it, and I'm grateful to him for raising it. I think across the House we've all got tragic experience of suicide, and our thoughts are with Gabe's family and with his friends. We will conduct a call for evidence on Part K of the building regulations about minimum guarding heights, so that necessary protections are in place to prevent future tragedies. We will also look at the contents of the bill.
Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, people across the Staffordshire Moorlands are extremely concerned by the number of solar farms and battery storage facilities that are having applications granted. Can you please, Prime Minister, give them some reassurance that you will change the law and that we will see good agricultural land saved for producing food as it rightly should be?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's right that we do both and do support agriculture, but she says people across the country are concerned about solar. They are also concerned about their bills coming down. They went up under the last government. The only way to get them down is on renewables, and that's what we're doing.
Final question, Jessica Warden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This morning in Westminster Hall, Centenary Action presented sashes handmade by a team of wonderful women working out of Newport's remake to every one of our 264 women MPs to mark today's 97th anniversary of the Equal Franchise Act. Will the Prime Minister join me in welcoming this initiative, which celebrates the contribution women make in public life? And although we now have a record number of women MPs, does he agree we must ensure we continue to break down barriers for women on our way to achieving the mission of a gender-equal Parliament?
Can I, through her, thank the women in her constituency for their hard work on this initiative, and having 264 women MPs is a really significant progress in this House. I'm incredibly proud that at the last election we saw 100 new female Labour MPs elected, meaning the number of female MPs in the Labour Party is now at a record high. And on the 97th anniversary of the Equal Franchise Act, it should be a source of great pride to the House that we have a record number of female members.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
So that brings us to the end of Prime Minister's questions, and no real surprise that the questions from the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, focusing on the government's U-turn on their welfare plans. Let's introduce my panel for this part of the programme. I'm joined by Nick Thomas-Symonds, who is the Paymaster General, and his opposite number for the Tories, Richard Holden. And, of course, our Chief Political Correspondent, Henry Zeffman, is also with us today. And I think, Henry, can say that an open goal probably for Kemi Badenoch today, given everything that's happened over the last few days with the welfare reforms and big U-turns by the government.
Yes, open goal, and I think Kemi Badenoch scored it, as most opposition leaders would have done. Look, I think we should say before we go on, we watch the same feed of Prime Minister's questions as people at home have been watching, and people will have seen that sitting next to the Prime Minister was a Chancellor who was visibly very upset. Our colleagues in the chamber are saying that on several occasions tears were apparent on her face. Now, politicians are human beings like all of us. They have lots going on in their lives, as well as the stresses and strains of high office, and Rachel Reeves holds one of the highest offices in the land, so we can't automatically connect that to what's happened to the government in the last few days. We've asked the question, and I'll let people know if we get an answer. But I think that's probably what many people will come to remember from this session of Prime Minister's questions. I think as far as Keir Starmer and his government more broadly are concerned, the question beforehand was always, what are they going to do next now that this has happened? And this session of Prime Minister's questions leaves us asking the same question about how this government is going to approach things going forwards after what was undeniably a very, very bad few days for them.
I mean, he was pretty composed with it all. He fought back, didn't he, with these questions, really saying, look, to the Conservative, you broke this system, we are trying to change it. But is welfare reform, is it still on the table now? I mean, is it dead?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Are they trying to change it, or were they trying to change it? Now, there is a review that was launched yesterday by Sir Stephen Timms. We're told it will be co-produced with disability groups and disability campaigners. So I think in light of that, it's very hard to see how what comes out of that review will look anything like what the government was proposing until midway through yesterday afternoon. I think realistically it does feel like the government probably is parking welfare reform, at least in the sense by which they meant welfare reform at the start of this week.
Well, let's ask the Minister that. Is welfare reform at an end? Why didn't you just pull that bill?
Well, because it contains very important elements of welfare reform that are now going to proceed through the House and were voted through the House of Commons last night. So, for example, the rebalancing of universal credit, the increase in the standard allowance of universal credit, the investment, really £1 billion in employment support for people to be able to go back into work, the introduction of a right to try, which means that people can actually try out work, and if it doesn't work out, they're not in fear of losing the support they previously had. Also, the ending of that constant and dignified reassessment process for those with severe lifelong disabilities. So, and alongside that, we will now have, Stephen Timms, who's someone who's very, very respected across parties, has deep experience of welfare and indeed welfare reform. He will proceed with his review, but that will now be taken forward. And those really
you can't get away from the fact that part of this was about saving money.
Night.
£5 billion this was going to save, and economists now saying it won't save anything.
Look, I do accept there is a cost to recent days, but I would also suggest that there is a case and a moral case to reform welfare. We've had a situation that we inherited. We've got 1 in 8 young people who are not earning or learning. We've got nearly 3 million people who are unable at the moment to work. That's why we're investing as we are in the National Health Service. A lot of the political parties do agree on this, but your Labour colleagues, a lot of them, don't seem to agree. When you talk to welfare reform, when you talk to them about it, they don't say that involves cutting any money. They want to spend more, some of them. Well, I think if you look at the last week, there is certainly an agreement on changing the broken system that we inherited. I don't think, and I've spoken to a number of MPs over the last week, there's certainly agreement around that. There is agreement around the principle that where people who want to work but need support to do so should get that support to go back into work. There's also agreement around the principle that those with severe lifelong conditions shouldn't have to go through that undignified process of reassessment. So there is that broad agreement that is there, and that's precisely what we will be
But the personal independence payments, which is, it's not an out-of-work benefit, so there are lots of people who are working, who are on it, that's disappeared from this bill completely. And it's on the face of the bill. It says it's PIP. It's not even in there anymore, is it? The Prime Minister has totally misread this, hasn't he?
Well, on the issue...
In terms of what Labour MPs were willing to do.
Well, on the issue of personal independence payments, it is correct to say that what the government is going to do is, yes, to remove, I think it's Clause 5 from the bill, and then to have the TIMS review. It will be co-produced with different groups, different charities that offer support to disabled people up and down the country.
But realistically, they were the best one. They're not going to say that should be taken away from people, are they? And Labour MPs don't think that either.
But it is about looking at the assessment process, which has remained the same for, what is it, the last 10 years.
And there's been not very many face-to-face assessments. Do you think they should be brought back?
There's an issue as well, yes, around how the assessments take place. I think that's absolutely right. And that is why we will have this wide-ranging review. It will be published in the latter part of next year. But it's also important to listen and to take people with you on this journey, and that is precisely what has happened in recent days.
But obviously if that had been done earlier, there wouldn't have been this problem. You've got to admit it looked pretty chaotic. A second reading of a bill which is really at the centre of a lot of the government's plans, and it was being slashed to pieces in real time in the House of Commons.
Look, I accept that there was an urgency to reform the system, and as a consequence of that, I do accept we've moved too quickly. I understand that. But what this is about now is looking forward. It is about accepting the need for reform and moving forward now with that reform. But also, yes, taking people with us, taking parliamentary colleagues with us, but also ensuring that the review is co-produced. And that's crucial.
Richard, your party talks about reform and welfare reform and talks about saving £12 billion. But every time I've asked someone sitting in that seat how you're going to do it and who might lose out, I don't get an answer. Can you help me out here?
We've set out our principles on which we would have worked with the government on this legislation, which is the legislation would have to have no tax rises as part of it in the November budget, and it'd have to see a reduction in the cost of welfare and a reduction in the number of people on welfare. It's quite clear now from this legislation...
But you knew the government was never going to agree to that about taxes. No government, your government, previous government, would never have done that. Do you agree with the changes to PIP, which the government was proposing?
What we're very clear about is what we want, and I think this is why where the bill's been actually, Nick says we had to get this done really quickly, etc., etc. I think it's quite clear this bill has been incredibly rushed. Right? They were trying to bounce their own MPs to supporting it. There's going to be a vote this week on one day, and then a vote later in the week on getting the bill through at a third reading.
But do you think there are people claiming this? Do you think there's people claiming this who shouldn't be?
Well, it's quite clear that we've got an issue with the amount of people who are going onto welfare. Before the pandemic, we saw a real reduction in the number of people on welfare. We saw loads more people getting into work. The pandemic threw up some really strong challenges on that. And we were already doing some significant changes around doctors' notes and things like that before the election. Obviously, we need to go further on a lot of that because we need to get the welfare bill under control.
But that means some people will lose out. No one's willing to tell me who.
I want to see people back into work. One of the biggest issues is since the election is the increase of the national insurance tax. Now, that's particularly hitting lower paid workers, it's particularly hitting part-time workers, it's particularly hitting people getting their first job, because it's really hammering.
Yeah, but a lot of these other people, but they weren't in work. They weren't in work before. So how would you incentivise people?
Than we did at the general election.
How would you incentivise people to go back to work?
Well, the first thing we do is we don't tax their employers for employing them.
Yeah, but they weren't in work before, so that how would you have done it then? This is partly your legacy, isn't it?
No, I think that's not true. A lot of these people were clearly in work, and now they're not in work. I want to see more people off welfare into work more generally. Don't disagree on that.
But any savings in the welfare budget you would get by getting people back to work. That's it.
There are no savings from this bill.
But do you think there are people claiming PIP now who shouldn't be getting it?
There are clearly people broadly on welfare who could be either working more or could require less support than they're getting at the moment.
Do you agree with that? Do you think there are people who shouldn't be on these benefits?
Well, when the Department for Work and Pensions were looking at this in the run to putting the reforms forward, they actually discovered many people actually who wanted to work if they were given the appropriate support. And that's one of the things that this bill does, with a significant investment in the support.
But personal independence payments don't matter. It doesn't matter if you work or not, does it?
No, but on the personal independence payments specifically, there has been this hugely significant increase. I think it's a 50% increase since 2019, 1,000 extra people claiming a day. Of course, we need to look at why that is happening, the underlying causes of it, but also...
Wes Streeting has talked about, mental health issues being overdiagnosed. Do you agree with that?
Well, we need to look at a range of issues as to what is causing that. That's why we need to look at the assessment criteria going forward, but also just...
But do you think he's right on that?
Yeah, he's absolutely right to be looking at that.
No, about it being misdiagnosed, overdiagnosed.
But there's a broader point here. Everyone agrees that there was a broken system that was left by the last government. We have put forward measures that are going through the House of Commons now that are going to start to make a difference. But also, by the way, where is reform on this in the last couple of days? I mean, reform seem to have gone into hibernation, presumably because their vote to place is split down the middle, and they've nothing constructive whatsoever to say on policy going forward.
So at the end of this process, whenever this is, so Stephen Timms, the Minister, is doing a review. Is the plan still to make the change to PIP, where the 4-point criteria that you have to meet, is that still going to be the plan, or is it all up in the air now?
No, this is a much wider review, and that's looking together with groups, as I say, that represent disabled people up and down the country. It will be co-produced. It's not about having a closed mind on particular options. It's looking at all these issues, what has been and what are the causes of the rising number of people that are claiming PIP, and can we act with regard to that. But secondly, then looking, yes, at how the assessment process is working. I mean, we've already discussed...
So the 4-point minimum requirement...
No, it's a much wider review. It's
not
going
gone,
with preconceived ideas. It's looking at a wider review. And I think that is hugely important. It's important because we understand this issue, we are listening, and we're taking the time to get it right.
Nick's doing a very good job at now trying to explain why Labour are in favour of welfare reform. The truth is, this was rushed in the first place because this number was plucked out of from the Treasury. He said to the DWP, go and save £5 billion a year in order to make the books balance for the budget later this year. It's quite clear that Labour now have a real problem with around £7 billion of extra taxes or they're going to have to raise, or they're going to have to borrow the money, or they're going to have to cut spending elsewhere. I think when you're seeing U-turns on the hoof, like we saw yesterday, billions of pounds just ripped out of legislation on the floor of the House with no real proper consideration of what that's going to mean, I think we're seeing a government with real issues now, with its own backbenchers. A massive majority, but huge numbers of them voted, either didn't support the government yesterday or voted against. And with that on the table, I think we're staring down the barrel of real questions for business across the country, thinking, where is this tax going to come from? They weren't expecting the national insurance rise last year. Now they're staring down the barrel of more tax rises.
Nick, taxes are going to go up now, aren't they?
Look, I'm not going to write a budget in October, November on the show today. That'll obviously be a matter for the Chancellor, but we made manifesto pledges in the general election around income tax, VAT, and obviously around national insurance.
Do you prefer more borrowing to fill that gap?
Those manifesto pledges stand. I'm not writing the budget. There'll be other things that will happen, obviously world events between now and the autumn, so that would be extremely unwise to do. But what we will do is move forward from here. There is agreement the system needs reform, and that is the journey we will continue on.
And the fiscal rules, so-called, mean that this hole does need to be filled, doesn't it? What are the options?
I mean, no one I've spoken to over the last few days thinks anything other than the taxes are going to go up, and whether they're constrained from saying so by position or not varies. But having candid off-the-record conversations...
But that's another U-turn, isn't it, for the
Well, it depends what taxes. I mean, yes, actually it is, isn't it? Because Rachel Reeves said after her first budget that she wasn't coming back for more tax rises. I don't think that's going to end up being the position. Pat McFadden, this is important. Pat McFadden did say this morning, he actually went out of his way to say to our colleagues on BBC Breakfast that the manifesto commitments on tax still stand. Now, as a reminder, that means no increase to the main rate of income tax, no increase to VAT, and no increase to national insurance, though, of course, there was a debate last year about the extent to which they stuck to that with the employer's national insurance increase. I think the debate is going to become whether it is politically, never mind economically, preferable for the government to go for sort of one simple revenue raiser, i.e. break one of those promises, perhaps a penny on income tax, for example, or whether it can make up the money through a series of smaller taxes which combined together raise the money.
Just really quickly, I mean, inevitably there will be talk about Rachel Reeves and her position as Chancellor, because these U-turns, a lot of people will say are down to her.
Yeah, I mean, before PMQs, I should stress, there was an awful lot of talk about her position. There are Labour MPs who blame, well, who agree with Richard, basically, that the driver of all of this was the need to fill a fiscal hole, and they think that was the original sin of all of this, and they think that the Prime Minister needs a new Chancellor. I shouldn't overstate that. I think there are lots who think that she is either not at the main fault here, or her role in this should not mean that the Prime Minister needs a new Chancellor. But no, it's something that Labour MPs raise privately a lot.
Nick, do you think the Chancellor should keep her job?
I think the Chancellor has inherited an extraordinarily difficult economic position and has done extremely well with it. And I think people should... We talk about black holes. There was a 22 billion black hole that we inherited. We're going to...
I mean, that's no.
But you think she should keep her job? You think she should stay in her job?
Look, obviously, cabinet appointments are obviously a matter for the Prime Minister, way above.
But you think she should stay in her job?
Pay grade. But I think the Chancellor has done with the inheritance that she had.
And just on that note, Vicky, I should have said, yes, cabinet appointments are a matter for the Prime Minister, and Kemi Badenoch invited the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions to guarantee that Rachel Reeves would stay in her job, and he didn't take the opportunity to do so. That is not an ideal position for a Chancellor to find themselves in while sitting next to the Prime Minister.
It's quite clear that a lot of Labour MPs also do not agree with what Nick is saying on the show today. There are a lot of them who I've spoken to privately who are very concerned about what's happening to the government at the moment.
Right, we're going to move on to talk about the big increase in the number of people crossing the Channel in small boats. Our correspondent James Waterhouse has been reporting on this story from Calais. James, just tell us what you've found over the last few days.
It's been a constant operation, really. We're talking about, from where we are, a coastline of about 180 kilometres, which police say they are struggling to keep an eye on across the board. We were up at the crack of dawn, 4 a.m. yesterday, and when the sun came up, we saw regular patrols, we saw aircraft overhead, these low-flying aircraft, to try and see what was going on. We saw Coast Guard ships, and then where we were, either side, you could see the dots of migrant ships heading out. And it was clear that the authorities are used to this happening on a daily basis, but so too are the people trying to make such a perilous final leg of a long journey to the UK. Once these boats are in the shallow water, once the people are in the water as well, the gendarme or the national police will leave them be over safety fears, they say. And it is this operation, this channel, which is fueling the ongoing political debate in the UK. But I think, you know, as someone who has come to this for the first time over the past couple of days, it's the scale of it that really strikes you.
James, you've been speaking to migrants as well, haven't you? What have they been telling you about why they take on this perilous journey?
It's an absolute belief as to why they are trying to get to the UK. In terms of why they leave countries like Eritrea or the African continent, the Middle East, it's a lot of people told us they were escaping war. Some people had been disowned by their own families, some were looking for economic opportunities, others simply wanted access to healthcare. And I think what's almost propelled their journeys through the continent to this part of northern France are European countries tightening their own immigration laws. And so a lot of people were saying, look, we're fed up with Europe, it's meant to be as one, a place of opportunity, and they still see the UK as being somewhere where they can make a real go of it. And of course, ministers just across the channel here are trying to do the same. But at the moment, clearly, it is seen as somewhere where they can make a real go of it. People want to be reunited with their families. And you know, they were outwardly unafraid of the risks of this journey, sitting on these ribs with small motors, carrying babies in some cases, heading out into choppy water. And you know, on Monday when we arrived, 800 people made the journey. So it's been quite remarkable in that sense.
James, thank you very much indeed for that. Nick, smash the gangs. It's not really working, is it?
Well, we've prevented, I think, 11,000 people from crossing the channel. There's been around 600 boats that have been seized. I was in Bulgaria only 2 weeks ago seeing the work. I mean, that may seem like quite a distance away, but actually, when you look at the people smuggling routes, that's another really important border that we are working on internationally. We've also put in place the Border Security Command. But I absolutely recognise that there is more, significantly more, that we need to do.
The small boat crossings in the first half of this year are up almost 50%.
They are. I mean, and look, I'm not underplaying that for a moment, that figure of, I think it's just under 20,000 this year. I mean, back in 2022, I think there was a 10-week period in the summer where you had 20,000 in that period. But we want to ensure that you don't have people in those small boats risking their lives on that.
But it feels like it's getting worse, not better.
But we are also taking more measures. So, for example, we have our Borders Bill at the moment going through the House of Commons, which, by the way, has been opposed by the opposition parties. That will mean that the powers that we can use and that our law enforcement can use to take on the people smuggling gangs will be on a par with the powers we can use to go after terrorists. So working both internationally but also with our domestic law strengthened as well is absolutely what we need to do. But we are preventing crossings from happening, but clearly with those numbers we have to do more.
OK, thank you very much. Now, that's all for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at the earlier time of 10:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer.